The moment her words left her lips, the laughter spread like spilled wine across the reception hall. It was sharp, cruel, and carried in waves across the chandeliers and gilded mirrors of the old estate. My son's new wife had just introduced me, not as her mother-in-law, but as the family charity project. She said it sweetly, with a smile that showed perfect teeth and the confidence of someone who thought she had already won. I stood frozen, my glass trembling in my hand. I was 68 years old, dressed in the same navy gown I had worn to a church banquet the year before. It wasn't designer, just something that fit well and made me feel dignified. My shoes pinched a little, and my silver hair was pulled into a bun I had practiced for hours that morning. I wanted to look respectable, though I knew my plainness would stand out among her family's diamonds and pearls. I heard a guest chuckle nearby, and another whisper, "Well, she's honest at least." My cheeks burned. I wanted to walk out right then, but my son's face stopped me. Thomas was standing at the head table, beaming, still caught up in the glow of marrying the woman he loved. He hadn't hurt her barb, or maybe he had chosen not to. Either way, he looked so happy. I swallowed my pride and forced a thin smile, nodding as if the insult had rolled off my back. But inside, my stomach twisted. You see, I had spent decades making myself small, hiding in the background so my children could shine. I raised Thomas after my husband passed away when he was 10. I worked double shifts at the library, kept a careful budget, and told my children that dignity mattered more than show. And yet here I was, treated as a burden by the very family that should have welcomed me. The bride's parents sat nearby, sipping champagne, their expressions carefully polite but not sympathetic. They had always considered themselves above me, and tonight they had the perfect stage to make sure everyone else thought so too. Their daughter, Evelyn, was just echoing the arrogance she'd been raised on. Still, there was one person at the table who wasn't laughing. The best man, Robert, leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing. He had been Thomas's closest friend since college, a tall man with a quiet voice and a habit of listening more than speaking. I had always liked him, though I knew little about his life outside of their friendship. At that moment, though, he looked at me with something I couldn't place. Pity, yes, but also recognition. I tried to eat the meal that followed, but every bite tasted like cardboard. Evelyn's laughter rang in my ears all night. She flitted from guest to guest, her white satin dress glittering under the lights, her hand clinging possessively to my son's arm. She kissed him often, but her eyes always seemed to flick toward me, gauging whether I had withered under her jab. By the time the music started and the guests filled the dance floor, I had retreated to the corner of the room, pretending to enjoy the orchestra. My heart felt heavy, but I told myself to endure it. I had endured worse. It was then Robert approached me, holding 2 glasses of water. He offered one to me without a word. His hand was steady, but his eyes were searching. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice tight. "You shouldn't let her speak to you that way," he said quietly. I blinked at him, startled. No one else had dared acknowledge it. "She's young," I said after a moment. "She doesn't understand." "No," Robert replied, shaking his head. "She knew exactly what she was doing. And so did everyone else in this room." His tone carried something sharper than sympathy. Anger, maybe. I wanted to change the subject, to shrink away like I always had, but his gaze held me. It was then I realized he wasn't just looking at me as his friend's mother. He was looking at me as someone who remembered, and that's when fear slipped into my chest. Because there was a part of my life I had buried so deep, even my children didn't know it. A past I had erased carefully, year by year, document by document, until only a handful of people alive could connect me to it. I thought it was gone. I thought I was safe. But as Robert leaned closer and said in a low voice, "You don't deserve to be treated like this. Not after everything you built," my breath caught. My glass nearly slipped from my hand. My mind raced. How could he possibly know? The music swelled around us, violins and laughter filling the air. But in that instant, I felt the walls of the reception hall closing in. My son's bride thought she had mocked me into silence. But she had no idea what storm she had just awakened, and neither did I. The music played on as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just tilted under my feet. But I couldn't shake the weight of Robert's words. Every beat of the drums sounded like a warning, every violin stroke like a thread tugging me back toward the years I had tried so hard to forget. I forced myself to sit at my table, clutching the water he had given me. My hands trembled slightly, though I kept them hidden beneath the linen cloth. Across the hall, Evelyn was laughing with her bridesmaids, her voice shrill and careless. She had no idea that the cracks in her perfect evening had already begun to form. Robert didn't press me further. He simply sat across from me, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never left mine. It was unnerving the way he looked at me, not like an old woman to be pitied, but as if I were a person of consequence. I hadn't felt that in years. Finally he spoke. "I remember you," he said softly. The words jolted through me. "You couldn't," I whispered back, my throat tight. "I do," he insisted. It was years ago. A boardroom, a heated debate over patents. You didn't say much, but when you did, everyone listened. You ended the meeting with one sentence, and the whole deal shifted. I was an intern then, just a shadow in the corner. But I never forgot you. My mouth went dry. That boardroom, the deal he was describing, was from another lifetime before Thomas was even born. I had been younger then, fiercer, with ambitions that frightened even me sometimes. I hadn't wanted my children to know that version of me, the strategist, the woman who could turn hardened executives into schoolboys with a single sentence. So I had locked her away, and yet Robert had seen her. "You must be mistaken," I said quickly, almost sharply. "I'm just a retired librarian." His lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes didn't soften. "You can pretend with them," he murmured, nodding toward the dance floor where Evelyn twirled in her gown. "But not with me. I know who you are." I turned my face away, staring at the candles flickering on the tables. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe. No, I would not let him pull me back into that world. Not here, not tonight. Yet deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, I was tired of hiding. The evening stretched on. I kept to myself, eating little, speaking less. Robert didn't leave my side, though he didn't crowd me either. He seemed to know I needed space, but also that I couldn't be left alone. Then came the moment of speeches. The clinking of glasses echoed across the hall, and the master of ceremonies called for toasts. Evelyn's father rose first, giving a pompous speech about tradition, wealth, and the bright future his daughter and my son would have. I caught a few sidelong glances from his friends, smirks about how fortunate Thomas was to have married into their family. Then Evelyn stood, raising her crystal flute. Her smile was dazzling, but her words were knives. "Marriage," she began, "is about leaving behind the past. It's about building something new, free of old burdens." Her eyes flicked to me for the briefest second before she continued. "Tonight is not just about two people joining together. It's about elevating our lives, surrounding ourselves with those who reflect who we want to be." The applause was loud, though not universal. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. My face was calm, but inside, fire burned. Robert leaned toward me. "Enough," he whispered. Before I could stop him, he rose to his feet. His chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, drawing every eye. Evelyn faltered mid-sentence, her smile freezing. Thomas looked confused, unsure whether to be alarmed. Robert adjusted his jacket and walked toward the microphone. His steps were steady, measured. When he reached the stage, he didn't take Evelyn's place. He simply stood beside her, towering over her with quiet authority. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "But after hearing so much about leaving the past behind, I feel compelled to remind everyone here. Sometimes the past is what built the ground we stand on." Murmurs rippled through the room. Evelyn shifted nervously, her fingers tightening on her glass. Robert's eyes swept the hall, then landed squarely on me. "I've known Thomas for years," he continued. "He's my brother in every way that matters. But what many of you don't know is that the strength he carries, the discipline that made him the man he is, didn't come from nowhere. It came from his mother. A hush fell. Even the clinking of cutlery ceased. Robert's voice grew stronger. Some of you see her as modest, ordinary, even dispensable. But I remember her from long before this wedding. I remember her as the woman who changed the course of a company with a single decision. The woman who carried entire rooms of men, twice her size, with nothing but her words and her vision. And when life tested her, when she lost her husband too soon, she chose to pour all that brilliance into raising a son who could stand tall today. Evelyn's face drained of color. Her smile was gone. I sat frozen, my breath shallow. He wasn't supposed to know all this. He wasn't supposed to say it out loud. Robert didn't stop. He turned fully toward me, his voice ringing like a gavel. "Mrs. Carter is not the family charity project. She is the foundation on which this family stands. And it's high time everyone here acknowledged it." The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in whispers, gasps, and startled applause. And for the first time that night, I lifted my head and met my daughter-in-law's eyes. She finally looked small. The silence that followed Robert's words was heavier than any music the orchestra could have played. I sat rooted to my chair, feeling 100 pairs of eyes darting between me, my son, and Evelyn. The clink of a dropped fork echoed unnaturally loud, like a gunshot in the stillness. Thomas's face was a storm of confusion. He looked from Robert to me, then back again, his jaw tightening as though he were assembling a puzzle he didn't know existed. Evelyn, on the other hand, was pale, her lips pressed into a brittle smile that trembled at the edges. I had hidden my past for nearly 4 decades, wearing my modest life like a cloak. To hear Robert tear it open in front of everyone left me raw, and yet, beneath the shock, I felt something I hadn't in years. Relief. A strange, dangerous relief. The applause grew louder, hesitant at first, then surer. People were rising, clapping their hands, nodding at me with newfound respect. Even Evelyn's parents looked unsettled, as though the ground had shifted beneath their carefully manicured shoes. I forced myself to rise, slow and deliberate. My legs trembled, but I stood tall. If Robert had chosen to reveal part of me tonight, I would not cower under the weight of it. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice carrying farther than I expected. "But this night is not about me. It is about my son and his new wife." I paused, allowing my eyes to rest on Evelyn. Her smile faltered further, her grip on Thomas's arm tightening. I only ever wished him happiness. That is all a mother can hope for. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. I sat again, my cheeks burning, my heart pounding like a drum. Robert returned to his seat, calm as ever. He didn't look at me, but the air between us felt charged, as though he had placed a key in my hand and dared me to use it. Thomas leaned close, his voice low but sharp. "Mom, What was he talking about? I shook my head faintly, unable to answer. Not here, not now. My son's eyes searched mine, but before he could press, Evelyn tugged on his arm and guided him back to the dance floor. Her smile plastered back into place, but the damage was done. As the evening wore on, I could feel the shift. Guests who had ignored me earlier now approached with cautious smiles, some offering compliments that tasted of guilt. "You must be very proud," one woman gushed, "raising such a fine young man." Another whispered, "I had no idea you had a background in business." Their curiosity was sharp, their hunger for gossip sharper. I offered polite nods, but inside, a storm raged. How much did Robert know? And why now, of all nights, had he chosen to reveal it? When the orchestra struck up another slow waltz, I slipped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, and the stars glimmered faintly above the estate's manicured gardens. I needed space, distance from the prying eyes and murmured questions. The door clicked shut behind me, and I exhaled shakily. My fingers brushed the railing, cool iron beneath my skin. "You should have told him," a voice said behind me. I turned. Robert stood in the shadows, his hands in his pockets. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes burned with something close to challenge. "I never wanted this life for Thomas," I whispered. "He deserved to grow up free, without the weight of his mother's choices." Robert stepped closer, his voice low but insistent. "Do you think hiding the truth makes him free? Evelyn already uses every chance she gets to make you small. If he doesn't know who you are, she will define you for him." His words cut deep because they were true. I had seen the way Evelyn looked at me, like I was something to be tolerated at best. If Thomas didn't know my history, he would never be able to stand against her disdain. But the thought of telling him everything, the meetings, the contracts, the fortunes gained and lost, made my chest tighten. Those years had been ruthless, filled with choices that haunted me still. Robert seemed to sense my hesitation. "I owe you more than you realize," he said suddenly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "That boardroom," he continued. "When I was a nobody, just an intern, you spoke and I listened. It changed the course of my career. I wouldn't be where I am today if not for you. And I can't stand by while she—" His voice sharpened. "Reduces you to nothing in front of everyone." I swallowed hard, the night air cool against my burning cheeks. "You've already said too much tonight." "Not enough," he countered. The terrace door opened, and Thomas stepped out, his face set. "Mom, Robert, what's going on?" The three of us stood there under the pale light, the hum of the party muffled behind the glass. My son's eyes flicked between us, demanding answers, and I knew my past was no longer content to stay buried. Thomas's voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since the day his father died. It was steady, but laced with tension, the kind that comes when the ground you've trusted all your life suddenly feels unsteady. "Mom," he said again, slower this time. What did Robert mean back there? What passed? My mouth went dry. For 30 years I had guarded the truth, carefully constructing a life of simplicity, so my children would never feel overshadowed or corrupted by the choices I had made in my younger days. I had convinced myself it was protection, but looking at my son now, his eyes dark with confusion, I wondered if it had been cowardice. Robert stood silent beside me, his jaw tight, waiting. He had thrown the first stone tonight and seemed ready to throw the rest if I didn't. "Thomas," I whispered, "this isn't the time." His brow furrowed. "Then when? When my wife is already treating you like you're beneath her? When the whole room just heard that you're someone I barely know?" Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. She had followed him outside, her gown shimmering like frost in the terrace light. "Thomas," she said sweetly, too sweetly, Don't upset yourself. Your mother doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Her eyes slid to me, sharp and cold. Least of all us. The venom under her honeyed tone ignited something inside me. For years I had bitten my tongue, allowed small humiliations to pass for the sake of peace. But tonight, with Robert standing like a silent guard at my side and my son demanding answers, I felt the old steel rise again. I straightened, my spine no longer bent by the weight of age or guilt. "No, Thomas," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "She's wrong. I do owe you the truth. You deserve it." Evelyn's smile froze. Robert's shoulders eased, as if he'd been holding his breath. I took a step closer to my son. The terrace air was cool, and the scent of roses drifted faintly from the garden below. I fixed my eyes on him, seeing not just the man he had become, but the boy I once carried on my hip, the child I had promised to protect. "When you were little," I began, "you thought your father was the one who made our life possible. And in many ways he was. He was kind, steady, the anchor of our home. But before he came into my life, before I became just your mother, I was someone else. Someone I didn't want you to carry with you." Thomas's brow furrowed deeper. Evelyn's hand slipped onto his arm as if to pull him back, but he didn't move. "I wasn't just a librarian," I said, my voice firming. "I worked in corporate strategy, negotiations, acquisitions. My words signed away millions, sometimes billions. I built reputations and ended them. And then, when your father died, I walked away. I didn't want that world for you. I wanted you free to become your own man, not my shadow." The silence stretched, heavy as lead. Thomas blinked at me, his lips parting. "You're telling me, all those years you—" "Yes," my voice cracked, but I held his gaze. "I let you believe we were ordinary. I let you believe my work at the library was my only life, because I didn't want you defined by my past." Evelyn's laugh sliced through the stillness, brittle and sharp. "So what? You sat in some fancy boardrooms and pushed papers? That doesn't change anything. You're still—" "Enough!" Robert's voice cut like a blade. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on her. "Don't you understand? Your father's company, the one you brag about, the one you think makes you untouchable, barely survived because of her. She was the one in the room when the decision was made to save it. And she did it with one sentence, one choice. Without her, your family wouldn't even have the standing to host this wedding." Evelyn's face drained of color, her lips pressing into a thin line. Thomas's eyes widened. "Is that true?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't do it for them. I did it because it was the right business move. But yes, I was there." The terrace door opened again, and a few curious guests had stepped out, drawn by the raised voices. Whispers started immediately. I could feel the tide turning. What had begun as Evelyn's attempt to belittle me was unraveling before her eyes. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flicking between me and his wife. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke. "Because I wanted you to believe in your own strength," I whispered. "Not mine." He shook his head slowly, stunned. Evelyn clutched his arm tighter, desperate to regain control. "Thomas, you can't seriously believe this. She's exaggerating, trying to make herself sound important." "It's pathetic." Robert stepped closer, his voice low but carrying. "Pathetic is trying to erase the woman who gave you everything you take for granted." Gasps echoed from the doorway. Evelyn's mask cracked, her eyes flashing with fury, and I realized this reckoning wasn't finished. Tonight had only just begun. Evelyn's grip on my son's arm looked less like affection now and more like a trap. Her nails pressed into the sleeve of his tuxedo, her smile stretched tight as parchment. She knew she was losing control of the room, and she wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Thomas pulled his arm free, gently but firmly. His face was pale, his eyes searching mine with an urgency I hadn't seen since he was a boy, begging me to explain why his father wasn't coming home. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "why would you keep all of this from me? All these years I thought—" He stopped, struggling to find the words. "I thought we were just ordinary." I wanted to reach for his hand, but my fingers trembled. "That was the point, Thomas. Ordinary was a gift I wanted to give you. You were so young when your father died. I didn't want you to grow up under the shadow of who I was. I wanted you to be free to build your own life." His throat worked as if he were swallowing a stone. But it wasn't true. "No," I admitted softly. "It wasn't." The crowd at the terrace door thickened. Guests leaned in, whispering, their eyes glinting with curiosity. Evelyn noticed it too. She turned to them, raising her voice. "You see?" she said, bitterness creeping into her tone. "This is what happens when people can't let go of their past." She couldn't just sit quietly and let tonight be about us. She had to make it about herself. Her words were meant to wound me, but instead they struck Thomas. His head snapped toward her, disbelief flashing across his face. "Evelyn, stop." His tone was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard him use with her. She blinked, taken aback. "I'm just telling the truth." "No," he cut her off. "You're twisting it. You mocked my mother all evening. You humiliated her. And now, when it turns out she's someone you couldn't even begin to measure up to, you try to paint her as selfish?" Evelyn's face flushed crimson. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Robert shifted closer to me, silent but solid, as though bracing for the storm about to break. "I married you," Thomas continued, his voice rising, "because I believed you respected me, respected my family. But the way you've treated my mother tonight—" He broke off, shaking his head in disgust. "It makes me wonder what else you've lied about." A deadly silence followed. Evelyn's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she clutched the folds of her dress. One of the older guests, a man with silver hair and a deep voice, spoke from the crowd. "I remember her," he said, pointing at me. "She was at the Ellsworth acquisition." Everyone thought the deal was lost until she walked in. One sentence, just one, and the whole room changed. "She saved 200 jobs that day." Whispers surged like waves. Heads turned toward me, faces bright with recognition and awe. Names of companies floated through the air, names I hadn't heard spoken in years, attached now to me. Evelyn's composure shattered. "This is insane," she hissed. "She's just an old woman clinging to stories." "No," Thomas said firmly, his eyes fixed on me with something new, respect, and maybe even pride. "She's my mother, and it's time I finally see her for who she really is." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My son, the boy I had shielded with my silence, was finally standing beside me. Evelyn's father pushed through the crowd then, his face pale and drawn. He looked at me, recognition dawning, and for a moment his mask slipped. He knew. He had known all along, and the terror in his eyes confirmed it. Robert's hand tightened into a fist at his side. He leaned toward me and whispered, "This is the reckoning. Let it come." And as Evelyn sputtered, her voice lost beneath the rising murmur of the guests, I realized he was right. The truth was no longer mine to bury. It was loose, alive, reshaping everything in its path. The only question now was how much more would surface before the night was over. The air inside the reception hall shifted like a storm front rolling in. Guests who had once ignored me now looked at me with hungry curiosity, some whispering, others staring openly as though they were seeing me for the first time. My son's bride stood stiff and pale, her father hovering protectively at her side, his jaw tight with unease. Thomas remained rooted in place, his eyes locked on me, searching for answers I wasn't sure I was ready to give. But the questions were there, written in the crease of his brow, the tremor in his voice when he finally spoke. "Mom," he said, steadying himself, "if all of this is true, if you were part of those deals, those companies, then what else have you kept from me?" I inhaled slowly, the weight of decades pressing against my ribs. Too much, I admitted. More than I should have. But never out of malice, only to protect you. His shoulders sagged, torn between relief and betrayal. Evelyn seized the moment, her voice sharp as glass. "Protect him?" she scoffed. "By lying to him? By pretending to be something you're not? That's not protection. It's deception." The words landed with venom, but this time Thomas didn't rush to defend her. He turned on her instead, and mocking her at our wedding, was that protection too? Or was that just cruelty? Evelyn flinched. Her father stepped forward, raising his hand as though to quiet the room. "Perhaps this isn't the place for family arguments," he said smoothly, though his eyes never left mine. "Let's remember the occasion." But his voice quavered. He was nervous, terrified even, and that told me something I hadn't realized until that moment. My past wasn't just a curiosity to this man. It was a threat. Robert noticed too. He leaned slightly toward me, murmuring just loud enough for me to hear. "He knows exactly who you are. That's why he's panicking." A ripple of whispers moved through the hall as guests pieced together fragments of stories, rumors, and names. I felt exposed, as though every file I'd ever signed and every decision I'd ever made were suddenly laid bare in front of strangers. I steadied myself. "Thomas," I said gently, "there are details you don't need tonight. What matters is this. I chose silence so you could grow without the weight of my reputation. But maybe I underestimated you. Maybe you needed the truth to stand taller, not smaller." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I don't care about the boardrooms, the deals. I just care that you didn't trust me enough to tell me." His words pierced me deeper than any insult Evelyn had thrown. I opened my mouth to respond, but Evelyn beat me to it, her voice rising in desperation. "Don't you see, Thomas? She's manipulating you, making herself the center of attention. This is supposed to be our night, not hers. And now everyone's talking about her instead of us." The crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement with Thomas's defense of me, others whispering at Evelyn's outburst. Robert finally stepped forward, his patience gone. His voice rang through the hall, calm but unyielding. "This isn't about stealing the spotlight. This is about respect. And respect is something your mother-in-law has earned in ways most of you can't even fathom." Gasps followed. Heads turned toward Evelyn's father, who had gone pale, sweat beating at his temple. His lips parted, but no words came. I watched him carefully, a realization dawning. He didn't fear exposure of who I had been. He feared exposure of what he had done, and what I still knew. The orchestra faltered, the violin bow dragging awkwardly as though even the musicians were caught in the tension. Evelyn clutched Thomas's arm again, her voice trembling now. "You're not really going to let them ruin our night, are you?" "Tell them, Thomas. Tell them it doesn't matter." But Thomas didn't speak. He looked at me instead, waiting, and I knew the choice was mine. I could retreat again into silence, letting the storm pass and the whispers fade. Or I could open the vault of my past and unleash the truth that Evelyn's family most feared. The hall seemed to hold its breath, and for the first time in decades, so did I. The chandelier lights above seemed to flicker, or maybe it was just my eyes adjusting to the strain of every gaze on me. I could feel the pulse in my neck, steady but urgent, like a drum leading me toward a battlefield I'd once sworn I'd left behind. Thomas's hand twitched at his side. He wasn't pulling away from me, but he wasn't shielding me either. He wanted answers, and for once, I had to give them. I turned toward Evelyn's father. He was trying to look composed, but his hands betrayed him, clutching his glass too tightly, his knuckles white. "You know who I am," I said quietly, though my voice carried across the hushed room. He stiffened. Don't lie," I cut in, sharper now. "You remember the negotiation in '93, Ellsworth Manufacturing? The night your entire career teetered on collapse until one clause was rewritten, my clause. You shook my hand afterward, called me the Iron Lady with a velvet smile. A murmur rippled through the hall. People leaned closer, recognizing the name of a company that had been on the front page for weeks back then. His face drained of color. "That was a long time ago," he muttered, his voice thin. "And yet here you stand," I pressed, "building your reputation, your fortune, your daughter's dowry, on the very ground I steadied for you. And tonight, that same daughter thought it amusing to call me a burden." Gasps broke out, sharper this time. Evelyn's hand flew to her chest, her lips parting in outrage. "How dare you! How dare you!" Thomas interrupted, his voice stronger now, his eyes blazing at his wife. "You knew. You must have known. And still, you treated her like she was beneath you." "I didn't know," Evelyn snapped, her composure unraveling. "Daddy never told me." She stopped, realizing too late what she had revealed. Whispers swelled, a tide turning against her. Robert stepped in then, his voice even, cutting through the noise. "You see, this wasn't about wealth or reputation. It was about dignity. And tonight all of you witnessed who has it and who doesn't." The crowd shifted, their loyalties quietly realigning. Some guests nodded at me with newfound respect. Others stared at Evelyn with thinly veiled disdain. Evelyn's father tried to salvage what little pride he had left. "None of this matters. This is a wedding, not a courtroom." "On the contrary," I said, my voice calm now, almost steady with relief. "This is exactly the place for truth, because marriage without truth is nothing but theater. And tonight, your daughter tried to play me as a fool on her stage. But the curtain has fallen." Silence again. Heavy, final. Thomas turned slowly to Evelyn. His face was pale, his jaw set. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked softly. "To humiliate my mother, to stand taller by cutting her down?" Her eyes brimmed with tears, but there was no softness in them, only rage at losing control. "She's making this all about herself. Can't you see?" Thomas shook his head. "No, what I see is the truth. And what I can't unsee is the way you've treated her." The room was still as stone. Every guest waited for his next words. And then, with a steadiness that broke me and mended me all at once, he said, "I can't build a life with someone who disrespects the woman who gave me mine." Evelyn gasped. A choked sound that echoed through the hall. Her father surged forward, his voice thunderous. "Thomas, think carefully." But Robert stepped in his path, his expression hard. "No, he's already thought carefully. This is his choice." And in that moment I realized the reckoning was not mine alone. It was my son's, Evelyn's father's face flushed red, as though every secret he had tried to bury had suddenly been dragged into the light. His voice cracked with anger. "This is absurd. You'd throw away everything for her? For an old woman clinging to faded glory?" I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. My body ached, but my back straightened with a strength I hadn't felt in years. "Not faded," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the silence. I walked away. That was my choice. I chose motherhood over boardrooms. I chose dignity over greed, and I would make that choice again. But don't mistake that for weakness. I am not ashamed of what I was, or what I am. Gasps and scattered applause rippled through the hall. Robert's eyes met mine, steady, proud. Evelyn, however, was unraveling. Tears streaked her perfectly powdered cheeks, her voice shrill. "So what? You think that makes you better than me? Than us? You gave up everything. You're nothing but a woman who hides in her little house with her little memories." That's not power, it's failure. The words hit like stones, but before I could answer, Thomas stepped forward. His voice was calm, but steel lay beneath it. No, Evelyn. The failure is marrying someone who cannot recognize greatness when it stands right in front of her. The crowd stirred. Some clapped, others gasped. Evelyn's father's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. Enough, he snapped. This spectacle ends now. But Robert moved between us like a wall. No, it ends when the truth is acknowledged. You built your name on deals she orchestrated. You live in a house of cards she once held steady. And tonight, you tried to let your daughter cut her down as if she were nothing. The man faltered, sweat beading at his brow. He tried to speak, but found no words. Thomas looked at me then, his eyes softer, filled with something I had longed to see since the day his father's coffin was lowered into the earth. Respect. Mom, he said, his voice breaking, I should have known. I should have seen you for more than just the sacrifices you made. I'm sorry, my throat tightened. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. There's nothing to be sorry for. You've made me proud every day of your life. That was all I ever wanted. The guests erupted into applause then, not polite, but heartfelt, raw. It rolled across the hall like a tide, drowning Evelyn's sobs, her father's sputtering protests. For once, the attention was not on their wealth, their estate, their performance. It was on truth. Evelyn tore away from Thomas's grasp, her gown sweeping behind her as she stormed toward the exit. Her father followed, his head bowed under the weight of humiliation. When the doors closed behind them, a strange stillness settled. The chandeliers glowed softly, the orchestra struck up a hesitant tune, and people slowly returned to their seats, though their eyes lingered on me with reverence I had never sought. Robert leaned close, his voice low. It's over. But I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks. No, it's beginning, because for the first time in decades, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't invisible. I was myself, fully, wholly, and my son finally saw me. Later, when the hall had emptied and only a few close friends remained, Thomas walked me to the car. He didn't speak at first, just held my arm gently, as though realizing he had been holding on to borrowed strength all along. At the door, he paused. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, he admitted. But I know one thing. You are not a burden. You never were. You're the foundation. I smiled faintly, brushing a hand against his cheek. Then maybe I did something right after all. And as we drove away from the estate, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and whispers, I felt lighter than I had in years. The past had finally come home, not to haunt me, but to set me free.